When we were there, that's when they realized I had so many glasses inside my belly.
August 7th, 1998 started like any normal Friday. But at 10:30 a.m., a bomb blast of a magnitude that had never been experienced before brought the country to a standstill.
After crying, I said that I'd never ever cry about the bomb blast again.
The day Kenya wept. The day the country was united in grief. 25 years later, one would wonder what the country has learned from that. Women who were heavily pregnant at the time recall how they almost lost their babies and their own lives. The babies, known as silent survivors, are not babies anymore. They are turning 25, but the mothers have lifetime physical and psychological scars. This is their story. I am Agutu Rosa. It's 7th August 1998. You are heavily pregnant. You go to work as usual, but since it's Friday, you are looking forward to a restful weekend. As you go about your business, at around 10:30 a.m., you hear a blast. The force pushes you to the floor. Shards of glasses all over, screams all over. People are calling their mothers and their maker. At first, you think you're dying, but dead people do not move and hear voices, right?
When we were walking through Agutu, somebody came with a Bible, reading a Bible and praying loudly, and he held my hands. And he rushed me to one of the cars. That time, I realized that my dress was torn, my hair was all over, and the dress was bloody. Though my injuries were not as seen as other people, my dress was full of blood from the people who got hurt, the people who were, smashed by maybe the glasses and all that.
People were on the floor, people were dying, and there were no vehicles. But one of my colleagues pulled me to a matatu that was there. That matatu was so old, and the little I could see, I told them, I don't think this matatu can take us to the hospital. And one of the colleague held my hand so firm. And as we sat there, that's when I started remembering I was pregnant. So I started asking them, where is my baby?
You step on bodies of people who were your colleagues before 10:30 a.m. that morning. You get out of the building, people are running all over. There's noise, dust, smoke, fire, and sirens. The people you meet are screaming with blood all over their faces and on their clothes. And that is when you realize the situation is worse than you thought. You feel wetness on your face, but your brain has not yet registered that it could be blood. You think it's sweat because you've been running. The next time you regain consciousness, you are in a hospital bed. This is the experience of most expectant women during the bomb blast that brought unimaginable grief in the whole country. 25 years later, they live with physical and psychological scars. but are thankful because the babies they were carrying during that blast are turning 25. Lillian Munyiva, a survivor of the blast, says that she was working on the 12th floor of the corporate building. The blast happened a month before their offices were moved from Haile Selassie Pioneer Building. Munyiva recalls how her boss, Mr. Kangeta, decided to move her sitting location from the window to another corner, a move that saved her life and that of her unborn baby on 7th August.
I had a place that I chose to be my sitting position. But my boss by then, his name is Kangeta, called me and told me, msichana wangu, nataka uhame hapa, ukakae kwa ile meza iko pale. And I told him, Mr. Kangeta, at my position, I think I need some place with some kahewa ndio niweze. Akaniambia, I'm ordering you utoke hapa, ukakae pale.
Munyiva says that she was in a different world. She did not even hear the second blast.
And one of my colleagues told me, his name is Shem. He told me, Lillian, tumekufa. And then I felt my shoes, because I remembered I always hear that when somebody dies, hawavaangi viatu utoka. So nikasikia kweli sina viatu. And then I realized I was in heaven. Then I wondered, how comes Mungu hukuniambia hata niache nimeaga mtoto wangu ile. I only remembered my third born, who was still not very old enough. She was around 3 years. And I wondered, mbona Mungu kuniambia nimuage tu.
With assistance, she was able to get out of the building, and that is when she realized she had blood all over. Her biggest worry was the condition of her baby.
I really thank Kenyatta Hospital. They really did a great job, because everybody then was a nurse. Everybody became a nurse. I saw one of the ladies with a stretcher who was a nun come across, and I just called and told her, you know what, I'm due anytime, and I don't even know the condition of my baby. Kindly help me. She took me on actually the stretcher was turned, and I was put on the stretcher, and they rushed me to labor ward, where they took good care of me. They checked on my BP, it was very normal. Everything was normal. With I just got a few bruises all over, and most of the glasses were left in my body.
Two weeks after the blast, Munyiva says that she knew that would have been her burial debt, because in her culture, they bury 2 weeks after the death.
I cried and imagined that this would be the day that they would just forget about me. I would never be heard any day. And I realized that, let me just pour it out. And I cried. After crying, I said that I'd never ever cry about the bomb blast again. And the only thing I can do is to encourage. And I remember meeting with one of my neighbors who was at the Garissa bomb blast. You remember the Garissa blast, yeah? And she was the vice chancellor then. And I remember talking to her, and she was like, if Lillian made it in the bomb blast, even me, I can come out of this. And we became good friends, and she healed out of the trauma. And that is what I've been trying to get out of people, that you don't have to live in that sadness. You can move on.
That time my lips were swollen. I couldn't speak. And that time I couldn't even feel my baby. So at that time I was taken to a room. I remember I was in the same room with Kamotho, the Honorable Kamotho. And when we were there, that's when they realized I had so many glasses inside my belly. So they started now dealing with my baby. They couldn't get the heartbeat. They couldn't even get to a point of knowing what to do, because there were so many glasses, because the glasses were falling. So at that time they took me to theater. They started taking some out. That was the painful thing I've ever had. They were stitching without anesthesia. And they also stitched some glasses inside. And that was terrible. It was painful.
Another survivor, Irene Mwamburi, has a similar story. She was in her office, and when she had the first bang, her and her colleague went to peep through the window.
Kutuambia nini banks zilikuwa zime strike. Sasa kulikuwa na hao staff walikuwa wamejaa hapo nje. Sasa tukasema maybe ni polisi wamekuja kwa disperse, ndio walikuwa wamejaa hapo nje. Akatuambia msizoe kuchungulia kwa dirisha, sasa zile mnasikia gunshots, mtakuja kutobolewa macho ndio mtajua bunduki ni nini. Ile alituambia tu hivyo, tukageuka. Kugeuka tu hivi tulisikia tu dum hivyo, sikujua ni nini iliendelea. Tulikaa hapo chini. Baadaye huyo mama alikuja kunisalimia, ni mama kutoka pia ni Mtaita. Kuja akaja akanishika. Baadaye tumekaa hapo tuko chini, hata hatujui ile, nilisikia tu sikujua nini imehappen. Sasa kwa akili yangu nilijua tumepigwa risasi. Vile tuliambiwa tu msizoe kuchungulia, mtakuja kupigwa risasi kwa macho.
Walking out, that is when she got a grasp of the whole situation.
Sasa zile tulianza kuteremka, tunateremka stairs. Ndio nikasikia watu wakilia, watu wanaomba, watu sasa bado hata hatujui ni nini. Sasa tukitembea akaniuliza, "Irene, nimekufa?" Nikamwambia hujakufa. Sasa baadaye ndio hata nilikuwa ninakaa ninasema, sasa mtu alikuwa ananiuliza kama amekufa na tunatembea. "Irene, nimekufa." Nikamwambia hujakufa, twende. Tukatembea, bado hata sasa hiyo hatujui. Mtu mwingine baadaye ndio alikuja kuniambia, "Unajua ulikuwa una bleed, unapangusa jasho." Unaniambia eti nina sweat. Sasa yeye akakimbia, akaona huyu ashapoteza fahamu, labda hata ajielewi huyu anaenda kufa, akakimbia akatuacha.
She was taken to Mater Hospital with the others who were rescued. A nurse noticed that she was pregnant and made sure she was taken care of. Before being taken to the ward, the then Catholic Archbishop Ndingimwana Nzeki prayed for her. After being bandaged, they could not feel the baby's heartbeat.
Sasa nilikuwa nasema tu madaktari, jamani, wanisaidie tu watoe huyu mtoto, kwa sababu nilikuwa najua amekufa. Wamtoe ni mimi nisife, niende nile huyo mwingine. Sasa nilikuwa tu wanakuja, wanasikiza, wanaenda. Wanasikiza ni kama wanasikia iko, lakini wanasema iko kwa mbali, ni kama pia mtoto alikuwa ameshtuka. Tukakaa mpaka around 6 ndio nilisikia sasa wakiongea wakisema huyu mtoto hata mimi nikaanza kumsikia sasa akimove. Lakini mpaka saa hizo hata sijajua ni nini imehappen, sijaona mtu yoyote wetu, sijaona, yani naangalia naona watu different wale siwajui. Ndio baadaye nikaona mtu mwingine akipita, nikaona huyu mtu ninamjua. Kazini yake tulikuwa tunafanya naye, nikamuita. Kwamba akaangalia akaja. Aliponisalimia tu hivi ndio nikaanza kulia. Nikamwambia mimi niko hapa, nimeumia, sioni wale tulikuwa na wao, sioni mtu yote wetu, kwani nini imehappen? Hivyo ilikuwa inaelekea 7. Ndio akaniambia eti ni bomu.
After a list of names were prepared for easy location by loved ones, her husband was able to find her. She would later be discharged. After a month's rest, she went back to work and delivered on 17th September. The babies the mothers were carrying are not babies anymore. They'll be turning 25 in a few days and weeks. A group was formed for them called the Silent Survivors. Nancy Mhoi, the daughter of Irene Mwamburi, says that growing up, they would call her Bomb Blast Baby. When she was older, she decided to inquire why that nickname.
Nilizaliwa hiyo time ya kulikuwa na hiyo Bomb Blast. So mimi nikigrow nilikuwa naitwanga mtoto wa Bomb Blast, mtoto wa Bomb Blast. So nikabidi niulize hii mtoto wa Bomb Blast kwa nini naitwanga mtoto wa Bomb Blast. Ndio nikapewa story vile kulihappen hiyo 7th August 98. Ndio niliambiwa nilizaliwa 1 month after hiyo incident. Paka recently venye nimekuwa mkubwa ndo nikadiwa kwa hiyo group ya hiyo Silent Survivors, ndo niliunderstand na au sijui ni Al-Shabaab walikuja wakalipua sijui eneo ilikuwa nini, but sasa venye kina mama walikuwa neighbors na hii building ndo wakakuwa affected.
Lucky Baraka, the son of Caroline Mudhoka, also narrates his story.
Just what that means, it's Baraka for those who don't know Swahili, that actually means blessing. and just being reminded from the beginning that this life that I have was definitely a gift, because when my mom was 7 months pregnant with me, as she was able to make it to the hospital, they actually found blood clots around the uterus and glass all over her body, and they said that I actually wouldn't make it. So just this gift of life that I have is just a constant reminder anytime someone calls my name, anytime I write my name or just see that, I just know that this life I've been given is definitely a gift, and not my own to waste away, but to try to really help people to be able to just to know God and to really have this peace even through all the chaos that we face, like that embassy bombing.
Emmanuel Mwema is another silent survivor. Just like Nancy at the age of 12, his mother, Lilian Munyiva, sat him down and explained how she survived the bomb blast.
I feel like it's 25 years of gratitude to God that I still have my mom around, even after that ordeal that happened. So that's the high understanding right now.
Mwema works at the Memorial Park at the moment, working with survivors and telling their stories because he's a filmmaker.
Listening to stories where there's an orphan who lost both of his parents, and like I'm working with people who also lost their parents, and I also get to understand there's a bigger picture than every other thing. So I'm really grateful to be working here. It just gave me another perspective about the entire space and the entire Memorial Park.
There's trauma that comes after such an experience. Sometimes anything can be a trigger.
Mpaka sasa haijanitoka. Nikisikia tu bomu pahali nasikiaga tu, na imagine sasa watu wanasikiaje sasa hii. Huwa inanishtua. Hata there was a time ingine iliplantiwa hapa kwa bus. Nakwambia hiyo siku tulikuwa kwa ofisi bado tulisikia tu na watu wanapiga nduru. Watu wakaanza kutoka wana crawl wakikimbia. Mimi nilijaribu kwenda sikuweza, nilibaki tu hapo chini nikaanza kulia, nikasema tena hii kitu imenipata tena. Ndio baadaye watu wakarudi wakasema hapana, iko tu hapa ambassador, si kitu kubwa sana, haiko kwa building.
Most women experienced in different ways in their trauma. Like personally, I was very scared. And I had a lot of pains in my stomach, and knowing that I had all the stitches on my stomach, that was very traumatizing. And every time I would take off my clothes, I would feel less a human being.
There are shards of glasses still in their bodies.
Shika hivi ni chupa. Ukikaa unasikia hata hapa mdomo vile nilikatika, zilitolewa nikashonwa, lakini nilikuwa ninakaa nafura. Nikifinya na natoa chupa. Hata watoto wangu walikuwa wananitoa, naambia hapa kichwa nasikia kitu. Wanakuja wakiangalia wanatoa. Zilikuwa zinatoka tu chupa ndogo ndogo.
There's a place on my leg, on my side of my leg. You see this small bit here? I cannot touch it so much because I always feel there's something inside. A glass, yeah. Most of our bodies are full of glasses. I went to Agutu more than 3 times to get a glass removed from my scalp. And on a shoulder, this side of a shoulder, that is like 8 years ago, even more.
Munyiva says that expectant women suffered a lot. One had the baby at 4.5 months and was in an incubator for a while.
Most of the women suffered a lot. They really suffered. One of the ladies gave birth immediately. I think she's not around, she's out of the country. She gave birth immediately. Another one gave birth to at 4.5 months, and the baby was taken to nursery for so long. I talked to her the other day, and when the baby was born, after even the nursery, the baby was not even able to breathe. There was a complication in the heart. She had to go for further treatment at Italy, and we thank God that right now she's okay, she's well. yeah, she was able to get out of it.
Dr. Sauda Faruqi, consultant obstetrician and gynecologist at Nairobi West Hospital, says that there's a little bit of data that shows a blast can cause minimal effects to the unborn baby.
It has some effects, although the amniotic fluid does protect the baby, because the baby is floating in the fluid. So to an extent, that fluid absorbs the the blast effects, and so the effects are minimal, but yes, they have shown to have an effect on the fetus.
Further along the pregnancy is, the more in danger the baby is, because the baby is bigger and the amniotic fluid is less.
From what has been observed, some of these babies will be born with they have headaches, or they react to sound, they're irritable. Okay, some might have some cognitive impairment initially, but most of these, when they grow up later on, it has not been shown to have much effect. But in the initial years, as a child, they've shown to have some psychological affectations, and mostly I think it's because the mothers themselves have suffered from PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And so if you are affected mentally, emotionally, it's going to reflect on your behavior, on how you're bringing up that child. So probably to an extent, it might also be that interaction of mother and baby.
Dr. Sauda says sometimes it could mean delivering earlier if the blast has caused the placenta to separate from the baby. That can cause loss of the baby. The mother would also need a lot of psychiatric care.
Now, the studies that are there, I think the one that was done in Kenya, the one that unfortunately we had in 98, I think. That one, I think the closest woman was about 100 meters. So I guess that proximity also makes a difference. The closer you are to the blast, the more, if she's having, if it's so close that she's having shrapnel on her, or so that also would affect. If it goes into her uterus, the force itself can cause a rupture of the membranes. So, like I said, the placenta can separate. We call it placenta abruptio. So all those things they're proper obstetric emergencies. Okay, so we would need to intervene.
Healthcare specialist Junior Mukudi says that symptoms of trauma can be physical and mental. Physical trauma can also trigger mental trauma if a person is severely injured, for example, someone getting paralyzed.
After blast, there is usually post-traumatic trauma, and most commonly it is the post-traumatic stress disorder, which happens as a consequence of the exposure. But mostly the first thing is to know what is affecting you. Is it physical or emotional? I would want to say that trauma lives in the body, then manifests in the relationship. So we have to look at the symptoms before we know what to do. The symptoms of post-traumatic distress can be anxiety, re-experiencing the images of the trauma, avoiding specific places and specific people related to the blast, sweating, headache, stomach, and at times you can feel muscle cramps. And this usually happens after a person has re-experienced the images of the past blast.
Whenever a disaster occurs, the first people on the ground experience a different kind of trauma after the fatigue wears off. When the country was brought to a standstill on 7th August 1998, the emergency first responders played a big part in the rescue mission. Journalists who covered the blast also experienced first-hand trauma. One would wonder, are they able to even close their eyes without seeing the disturbing images? Do they get counseling after such an experience? Dennis Muthigi, an emergency medical service consultant and an emergency responder, says that he had seen trauma before, but the 1998 bomb blast was beyond extreme and sleeping was hard for a while.
There is no such thing as a good sleep after you see that. For some time, even after the bomb blast, I had some reflections on what I was seeing, particularly recalling the deaths, the faces on what you are seeing and everything else. It kept there for a while, but it has eventually gone.
It brought comfort to him whenever they rescued someone after a day or 72 hours.
We saw a lot of stuff that was happening that I'm saying that pretty much nobody had anticipated that would be that. The scale in between, in what we saw then, I can tell you it took a toll a bit, but we basically tried as much as possible to offer life assistance, save a couple of lives, and continue helping and saving who we could have done that time. Yes.
Another first responder, Paul Washuri, remembers the blast vividly. He had just turned 19 a day before the bomb blast. Being a young volunteer at St. John's Ambulance, at no point did he expect a disaster of that magnitude. Paul says that at the time the country did not have enough ambulances, so they got help from volunteers who offered their vehicles to transport the injured.
Actually, we were at that site for over 2 good hours, just treating different people and managing them at that, because we had very limited resources and we couldn't leave that scenario because everybody needed help. So it was the most important thing was to ensure that you take care of their immediate need, that was their bleeding, control their bleeding. One of the major challenges was that most victims had shrapnels. This is as a result of the blast. So you can imagine all the glasses shattered and pieces of metals. So it was like flying debris at high projectile speed that pierced a lot of people. So you will find as you were managing their injuries, what you could come across are pieces of glass, metal, wood, that needed some specialized care because of they needed to be removed and then taken care of. So that was one of the biggest challenge. And a number of them also had a lot of injuries to the eye because naturally when you hear blasts, everybody looked upwards. Little did they know that the next thing, there will be flying projectiles. So a lot of casualties had injuries to the eyes.
They could hear voices of people who were stuck under the collapsed buildings.
We did not understand what other danger, or will there be another explosion as we are trying to help. And noting that this was one major explosion that we were experiencing in history. We had never had such an explosion before of that magnitude. So there were quite a number of dangers that were being overlooked. And I think some order came in when the military came. That's when they were able to pull all the public down so that now they assess the area and decide how well do we start approaching this removal of the debris and try to see how many people we can rescue or who is trapped, and also trying to understand the building, how it was constructed, and where do you think people could be.
After the blast, they needed in-depth training. In 1998, a group of 40 in Nairobi and 40 in Mombasa were trained. By the end of 2001, 160 were trained. The group formed the Kenya Council Association Emergency Technician that later changed to the Kenya Council of Emergency Medical Technician.
So the whole agenda of this organization was actually to push the agenda of emergency medical services in Kenya, and also to bring more education or more people to be trained in emergency medical services, and also to bring advocacy into people and the public and the government to understand why there is need to have emergency medical services in Kenya, because after the Miraculous, we noted that that was a huge gap, because you need people in between from the scene of incident to the hospital. Who's the link? Who takes this victim from the roadside or from home and transport them to hospital? So, and we find that link it will be filled up by what we call the pre-hospital care providers. And these are emergency medical technicians. They work in the ambulances and also in accident and emergency departments in hospitals.
I feel like as a country we need to have a central emergency shared communication. That's what we lack as a country, where we have different actors communicating in silos. I think what we need to have is a centralized, like an emergency operations center where all the actors respond. And this was evidenced during the COVID pandemic, where Kenyatta was like the hub of all the communications. All the ambulances, all the policemen, all the actors were actually reporting to the EOC. So if you can have one central command center and have a digital incident commander, and during the Dusit attack, and Westgate never had an incident commander. Dusit had an incident commander where the DCI led the digital communications on social media. The then IG, Inspector Boynet, led the digital communications. And this time, during the COVID, the Ministry of Health led the digital communication. So if we can have, like during the crisis, which is the incident commander on social media? Do we have one? That like the NDOC needs to be funded. And the NDOC is the lead agency in terms of disaster response, but are they funded? No.
During a disaster, street kids are often then trained first responders. Roni Warioko, who was just a teenager and a street kid in 1998, was among the people who volunteered in the rescue mission.
Watu wengi tuliona wakiwa wanakimbia na direction tofauti tofauti. Tulipiga blast ya kwanza. Tukikaka kidogo kama kitu 1 minute hivi, tena blast ingine ikapiga. Vio zilikuwa ziko all over. So mimi nilikuwa na mabeste zangu, tulikuwa kwa maboy waine, ambapo au size au walidedi. Tulikuwa nao, tulikuwa tunazunguka tutao vile tu ma street boy waga wanazunguka. So si tulianza kuona smoke iko juu ya black, makaratasi, machupa. Saa zile makaratasi si tuliona ni kama do. Tukasema wacha tufike hivyo, tukuje tuangalie kama hata tutapata kitu. Juu tulikuwa kwa tuna do hiyo siku. Tuliamua tu hivyo vile tulikuwa kwa waine. Tukaanza kutoa wale watu wameumia ndani ya basi. Bila kusahau nikiestimate watu wale tuliweza kutoa ndani ya hiyo basi walikuwa kwa about 30. So tulikuwa tunatoa mtu ndani ya basi, tunamweka hapo hivi kando kwa pavement, tunarudi kwa basi tunatoa mwingine na mweka hapo kwa pavement. Barabara yote ilikuwa imejaa blood. Hiyo siku ni siku ambayo sipendagi kukumbuka, kwa sababu nilikuwa bado young. Kwa nina hizo flashbacks zilikuwa zinanikujiaga sana, niza kuona watu wenye waliumia, na naweza shukuru sana nikisema among wale watu walifika kusaidia katika kuvolunteer kwa hiyo rescue, wengi walikuwa ni street boys.
A renowned photojournalist, Jacob Otieno, was off duty on that day and had spent the better part of the morning in his house. He decided to run errands in town, and that's when he met the commotion.
As we were approaching City Stadium, out of curiosity, almost everybody was facing the direction of the town. And more and more people, as we were moving closer to City Stadium, more and more people were gathering together. Suddenly at the roundabout of the City Stadium, the next thing I heard was the matatu driver making a quick U-turn. And he said loudly in Kiswahili, "Kumedhuka." Actually, he did not know what was happening. So he turned, as if we were heading back to Donald.
Being a journalist, Jacob decided to go to his office.
That time Standard Group was at Likoni Road. The head of office was at Likoni Road. So when we reached the roundabout there, next to the church there, I told him to stop. Me, I'm alighting, because I could not go back to the estate. So from there, I rushed to the office to find out what was happening. And the first person I met at the staircase was my former boss, the CEO, editorial CEO, was called Wellam. So Wellam was like, "Here, come here, I was looking for you." So I asked him, "What is happening?" So he told me, "Something is serious in town. Just climb up the building here and try to see if you can see something." Then I climbed, I saw the smoke in town. So I came back and told him, "I can only see smoke." Then he told me, "Wait a moment, there is a chopper that we are organizing. We want you to go to Wilson Airport."
Jacob remembers the iconic images he took.
I think that time the Minister of Education, J.J. Kamotho, had gone to the US Embassy to visit. Was it the US Embassy? No, the US ambassador had gone up there to visit him. He was at another top building, I think 6th floor or something. So that thing caught up with them. And as they were being rushed out, I remember Kamotho was carried like a wheelbarrow. Some guys volunteered, including his security. And the ambassador also was seriously injured, but his security team was with her. So they were seriously injured, including Kamotho. And Kamotho, we have a picture of Kamotho being carried out of the rubble.
The blast came with its trauma, and one of the major traumas for Jacob is the death of Rose Wanjiku, who was known as the country's candle in the wind.
Rose got stuck in the rubble, and she could not come out. People would hear her. Rose took about 3 days in the rubbles. I think it was 3 days, if I'm not wrong. We could hear Rose talk. We could talk to her. Security was talking to her. The rescuers were talking to her. But Rose did not survive. The third day, she succumbed while still at the rubbles.
The newsroom was buzzing with activity from the moment word started going round that something had happened in town. The editors raced against time to produce an early edition to give Kenyans a glimpse of what had taken place. After the bomb blast, a memorial park was built where the American Embassy was. The park, that has a museum inside, is meant to be a safe haven for the blast survivors.
The park is an oasis of peace. It's a public green space located at the site of the former US Embassy in Ufundi building. It's a symbol of hope, an oasis of peace. And it's a place where people come to relax, to reflect, and to remember. It's open 365 days a year to members of the public, to children, and to visitors from all over the world.
I was creating the storyline, the background about what happened on that day and afterwards. I looked at thousands, maybe 5,000 images, and I chose 29 images to go into the story. And I wanted to choose one image that I thought encapsulated everything about that day. So on the one hand, you see the destruction and the terror, the bus, the blown up bus. But then you see two bystanders helping an injured woman through that disaster, if you want. So for me, it captures both the tragedy and the humanity of that day. And underneath that, you see a quote from the then ambassador talking about, through community, you can do anything, even in the most difficult moments of time. I asked contemporary artist Carmen Winnie to create a piece that reflects what many people remember from that day, which was the shattered glass. We know that thousands of the injuries caused were from shattered glass that became shrapnel from the buildings, from the vehicles. So I wanted a sculpture that reflected that glass, but in not a traumatic way. So what the artist has done, you can see, is put pieces of glass in this sculpture, and on about 20 pieces of the glass are quotes from Haile Selassie, talking about dialogue, coexistence, peace between nations, and so on. So that's, and as we know, the bomb blast took place on Haile Selassie Avenue. So that's the different connection between this sculpture.
Among the children whose parents died during the blast is Idris Vonza. Idris's father died on 7th August, and the tie he wore that day was donated to the museum.
When my mom went to identify his body, she identified the boxer, I guess. That's the only thing that she could see. It was only the boxer. But the funniest thing was the tie was intact. As you can see, we have the tie here at the museum. And so it's even a very special thing that's here in the relics, because everything else has a touch of blood or something, but the tie is still intact. So it was really not, it was maybe his day. But after that, we found the body, and since that time, I wasn't yet in terms with death. I was still young. I didn't understand that when somebody dies, there's no coming back.
Agutu Rosa, KTN News.